and welcome everyone to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina Caro, clinical psychologist, and this is my partner, Karen Linsky, executive leadership and self-trust coach. Hi, Karen.
Hey, Christina. I'm excited about today as it covers something close and dear to your heart.
Yeah, today we're doing the fourth episode of the series of 8 on Carl Jung's cognitive functions. And today we're doing introverted intuition, which is my dominant function. So I'm going to do my best to try to help people understand this, but it is probably the most difficult of all the function types to describe. So Karen's going to be helping me out. So to recap, for those of you who might have just stumbled on this episode as your first episode, what we're talking about is what Carl Jung identified as psychological cognitive functions, specifically on how we perceive or we gather information without processing it. So it's just gathering that information, or the judging function, which is how we then organize that data and then come to some sort of conclusion. Now, everybody has a way that they prefer to see the world and a way they prefer to organize that data. And we call that a dominant preference and an auxiliary. But over our lifespan, because the brain continues to grow, we have the opportunity to develop our non-preferred cognitive function types. So we are going through all 8 of them, 4 ways of perceiving and 4 ways of organizing that information and making decisions. Each of the ways of perceiving is related to an orientation in time. So in our first 3 episodes, we talked about the sensory perceiving style in the outward or extroverted orientation and having a here and now time orientation. We then followed up with the sensory perceiving in the inward or introverted direction, and that has a present to past orientation. Last week, we did intuition, which is the 5 senses plus a 6th sense that is oriented outward in the extroverted orientation, and the time orientation is the present to the near future. Today, we're going to be doing introverted intuition, which is that intuitive process that is inward focused, and the time orientation is past, present, and future. So then at the end of this, we're going to do a special episode on just how you can use this in a model, say, in your organizations.
Now, before we start though, help us out and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share, hit that notification button so you will know when additional. And for the pod listeners, hit the text us link in the show notes so that we can actually answer some questions. So let's get into the episode. So tell me and remind everybody about introversion and extroversion and how it is associated with the cognitive function of perceiving or judging.
Okay. If you all watched our first episode that we did in this series, it was on just what we mean by introversion and extroversion, which is the direction of energy. And what we explain is that according to Carl Jung, it isn't a sort of standalone thing in itself. It relates to the processing functions that we're talking about, how we perceive and how we make decisions. If I'm someone who gathers information with my 5 senses, the orientation, if it's introverted, means that what I notice is the impression in my own experience and my memories that are within my mind of that sensory information, versus someone who gathers information with their 5 senses, but it is extroverted. So the energy is outward. So they're really focused on the concrete data of what I can smell, what I can taste, what I can see, etc. Mm-hmm. Now, last week when we talked about intuition, let's just review what intuition is. So intuition, how it's different from a sensory perceiving style that is focused on what I can touch, taste, hear, smell, and see, is that intuitives also perceive how things are interconnected, what might be sort of between the lines, or what is the possibility of what something could be in the future that may start with an object. And so in the episode, we had a coffee cup, but then Karen, who has this as a dominant function of intuition and the extroverted attitude, went on and sort of quickly bounced away from the coffee cup into all the different things that she could make with it. So each function is oriented in a direction. And today we're doing intuition, so that ability to see how things are interconnected. That's inward focus that comes from internally. And this is why it is a more difficult function to describe, because it's something that happens unseen, right? Because I can't see what you do inside your own head.
Mm-hmm.
I can only see the external behavior that might result from it, but I can't see what's going on inside a person. And that's why it is a little bit difficult to describe this, even though it's my own dominant function.
There's also only 8.5% of the population, right? So that's an interesting dynamic within itself as well.
Well, so what for the introverted intuitive, yes, if you add up the prevalence of each of the 4 personality types based on the system called the Myers-Briggs personality type, where there's 16 personality types, the 4 that have introverted intuition, all added up, are only 8.5% of the population. Versus, I think, Karen, when we were talking about, I'd have to scroll back, but the sensories, it's more when you add both types together, it's like almost 3/4 of the population.
Exactly. I was like, wow, that makes sense, because a lot of the business world is associated with those individuals, right?
Well, and in terms of intuition and the introverted attitude as the dominant function, that's only 3.5% in total. Okay. And my personality type is only 1.5% of my combination, 1.5. Yeah.
Because you're an INFJ, right?
Yeah. So in the Myers-Briggs, these are the 4 types. If you've ever taken the Myers-Briggs instrument, what we're talking about for people who their primary process that drives their behavior is introverted intuition, that would people who had the code of INTJ or INFJ. There are also 2 other types who have it as their secondary function, and that's the ENTJ and the ENFJ. So let me just review again what we mean by dominant. And we're using a metaphor that I really like from this company called Personality Hacker. And we're going to have a link to that website in the show notes, because if you want to learn more, maybe do the training, it's one I would recommend. The dominant function, if you think about a car, it would be the driver of the car. Your auxiliary, your second one, is your co-pilot in the passenger seat. Your tertiary function, or your third one, is like the teenager in the back seat. And your 4th function, which Jung called the inferior function, is the toddler in the back seat. Now that's only 4. There's still 4 others. Those are on the trunk of the car.
I remember you always telling me that. I always laughed at that. So I love that, because I now know which ones are in the back, in the trunk of the car. So it makes me feel better.
Well, yeah. So Karen and I are both intuitive perceiving types, but Karen's is in the extroverted attitude and mine is in the introverted. And so in terms of how my brain is developing over time, Karen's way of processing is actually in the trunk of my car, and my way of processing is in the trunk of Karen's car. So we have to work to make sure that we fully understand each other, because we're both making intuitive leaps with it and maybe leaping all different places. So we have to slow things down to make sure we understand.
And I think it's interesting too, because we were talking about earlier where Christine has to work really hard sometimes to understand what I'm saying. So I use the words like it or they a lot, right? Or, so, and she has to be willing not to just let it happen, but just say, hold on a second. Let me just make sure I'm caught up. And I think that's the whole thing we're trying to also remind you of, is to appreciate the difference in these, but also being in about some curiosity, so then you can actually have a better engaged communication instead of getting upset that this person I can't communicate at all, but slowing it down and understanding the type so that we could actually say, this is what I need for you to do, right? Because then once you remind me, then I become more intentional to use not the it anymore, right? Now, then again, I go back sometimes, but I try to be very intentional. So let's just say that. So I think what's kind of interesting, because last time you used some fictional examples. So what are some of the fictional examples that you would bring out to explain this type?
You know, I did a search because dominant introverted intuitives, we are so rare, right? You combine the ones who have a thinking judging style or mind, the feeling judging style, and it's still 3.03.
It's very
less
small.
than 4
We'll
out
just
of
put it
100.
Yeah, very small.
So what came up for the introverted intuitive who's combined with a more logical thinking, like objective logic, and we'll go into the judging in the future episodes. Bruce Wayne, Batman, but Bruce Wayne.
Batman, yeah.
He's classic. So he's driven by a singular vision. So introverted intuition is, I think the title of this episode is called Inner Vision, because we are the strategic visionary personality sort of processing type. So he has a singular vision of justice, that extroverted thinking, what's the rules, what's the law. And he's very, very focused, future focused. Just think about all his gadgets and stuff like that. And he does tend to strategize on long-term solutions, right? He wants to bring peace and justice to Gotham City. It's a long-term investment because the crime's been there for a very long time. And again, it's really more the Bruce Wayne part. And so you get to see a little bit of what the analytical part, that INTJs can be seen as somewhat cold. And you definitely get that in the Bruce Wayne character. Now compare that to the example for INFJ, which is Dumbledore from the Harry Potter.
I love Dumbledore. So wise, so intuitive. Exactly. Okay. So tell us more about him. Why?
Especially if you all remember the Dumbledore, the actor from the very first Harry Potter, because I think he really manifests or expressed introverted, like INFJ, better than the other Dumbledore, because he was more quiet and soft-spoken. But what you see with Dumbledore is, again, Dumbledore has a big picture of what is happening. Over time, he understands that Harry Potter is going to have to sacrifice himself. And we lead up to that over time. And he's constantly thinking ahead on before anybody else believes him. One of the classic examples of being an INFJ that I think that Dumbledore represents is if anybody saw the movie and you remember that none of the people in the government, or I forget what it's called, would ever believe him, right? That Voldemort was coming. One of the gifts of this personality type, and both of them, the INTJs can see long-term concepts and ideas and strategies and how it's going to unfold. And INFJs, our orientation is a bit more to how different things are unfolding that will affect people, the community, our families. But we tend to not be believed by many because we can't point to it. It hasn't happened. The sensates in the world are like, what are you talking about? This isn't going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And that ability to have that vision is ignored. There is a Greek, I think it's from Greek, the Odyssey, about the Trojan War. And there is a character, Cassandra, and she's a priestess of Apollo, and she rebuffs him, so he curses her. She has the gift of sight. She can see that Troy is going to burn, but her curse is no one will believe her. That is the classic experience for INTJs and INFJs. We can see way into the future how things are going to unfold, and no one's going to believe us.
So that is really hard. I was thinking about that compared to mine, that's really, really hard because no one can even fathom that it's going to happen even.
Right. It's like, where's the proof? So the way we define introverted intuition, it is the only function that does not need external stimuli for the catalyst. So we talked about extroverted intuition starts with something, a person, a place, or a thing, and then it bursts into what could it be. This is why Karen's so good at facilitating, because there's all the, for people who don't know what facilitation is, Karen, can you just describe what facilitation is like?
Wow, I love facilitation mainly because I'm very much in the present. And when you're in the present, it's like we'll be talking about the orientation, but you're in the present. And then what I'm able to do is make connections between all these different things that are happening in the room, and then kind of bring it all together, consolidate it, but not in a way that is forward looking, like so people aren't following it, but I'm just bringing different things in that allows them to have a better discussion. So that's what I would call facilitation, where it's not about me, but it's being present in the room that I can help guide the discussion so nobody's forgotten and we're just taking in the different perspectives and things. Is probably what I would best describe
it's got different people or throwing in ideas,
sharing in,
and brainstorming
right. And I don't bring in myself in. It's the whole part of a facilitator. You don't bring yourself in. You just bring all these different things that they're saying, right? But it's facilitating that brainstorming and that discussion and that dialogue that we've talked about in the past, so that everybody's voice is heard. It's people who need more time. It allows to make sure every voice is actually heard and decisions are made.
What you can hear here is that it's still about people that's in the present moment. It's about the ideas in the present moment, but it's the connections that she makes on the goal that they're moving, how it connects to the goal that they're trying to move towards. So it's all this connection, but it starts with this process. Introverted intuition is the only one that doesn't require that. This is the experience anyone you might have had. A lot of people will have this where you're taking a shower or you're driving on a really familiar route, and then some like aha just comes into your head. Most people have had some experience where you're in the shower and then like, oh, and you have an aha moment. That's introverted intuition bursting into your consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah. So everybody will have it occasionally, but people like me, INTJs, it's like this is how we operate all the time. So it doesn't require that external stimuli. It's an inward focused process. And what's going on in there is there's an integration of complex patterns, insights. It's producing more abstract ideas and visions about the future, very meaning oriented. Very much, it's kind of what's way beneath the surface. So as a psychotherapist, it's a great function to have as dominant because clients are talking and what I'm hearing is everything that is not said. And then my job is to bring what's unconscious and bring it into awareness. So having this as a dominant function is a great tool to have in doing this type of work. So, and the way that, if I could just say, the image that for me represents like introverted intuition is an iceberg. And so most people like at the sensory world, that's like the tip of the iceberg. But what an introverted intuitive, what's going on for them is everything underneath the surface. So if it's what's underneath the surface, though, it's really hard to bring outward on our own. We really need to have people sort of trying to ask and inquire for us to access that information. Again, it's very hard to bring to the surface. So it's subconscious oriented. It's in the unconscious. It's the subconscious. And that's what just makes it a really difficult type of process to explain to people and also to have them trust what we're saying. And it's usually over time, just people knowing you. They're like, yeah, I don't know how you figured that out, but you just seem to know things, and eventually they trust you.
Right. So, I could see that because it's like, how could she see that? Right. That's that doubt. So you need that personal trust and that. Okay. So let me just shift to something else too, because we talk a lot about orientation. So when you talk about orientation, I think you talked a little bit about it. It has a strong future orientated perspective, right?
Right. Well, it's a continuum. It is the one type that spans the entire continuum of past, present, and future.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And when I say past, I don't just mean personal past. Like introverted intuitives will have a sense of history, and it'll be how it connects to the present, and then where it's going far into the future. So it is a broad continuum in time.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, if you're someone who your orientation in time is the here and now and 48 to 72 hours plus or minus. I'm talking gobbledygook when I'm trying to, explain something conceptual or that is going off into the future. If you are someone who is oriented only past, then when I start talking about how the past connects to the future, I start going into gobbledygook land for you. And this is why we are doing this, to help people understand this concept of cognitive diversity, that people process and think differently, have different gifts. And if we understand that and reduce our judgment and get curious, then we can really enhance our lives, our organizations, our teams, our families, because we have this beautiful diversity of what we're seeing and picking up.
Yeah, because I could see myself in the past thinking, I don't know what he's talking about, and just dismissing it. And I think what's interesting about what you said just a minute ago about that past, present, future was that you could actually anticipate and see the potential outcomes because of all those different perspectives that you can bring together, right? Because I always remember when people talk about history, right, and how history repeats itself. I don't remember history because that's not my orientation, so now I can say that. But it is interesting how you can do it very quickly. It's like that film, like that, all these different images come up. Like I remember this one thing I saw, and it allows you to really come out with this like concreteness and concrete stuff. You can see the distant future. And I have to apologize to y'all that are this type, that I didn't really appreciate the gift, because I think it is about what Christina are trying to do, and everything that we're doing is to get people not to judge, to bring in curiosity and to bring value, like she just said. So I think that's really cool.
Oh yeah, Karen, I would say like most of my life, I've seen it as a blessing and a curse. It really, it's a hard process to hold, to see so much and how everything's connected and likely outcomes, and know that it's because of the diversity, people are going to dismiss certain chunks of what I can see instead of taking the whole, until over time, like I've been in private practice now for a while, and clients who worked with me for a while where they just trust me.
Yeah.
I can hear about their past story, know what's going on in the current life, and see the trajectory of where it's likely going to end
That's
up.
amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So that goes into some of the gifts, right? Because I think now you're talking about the gifts of where this is so powerful. So what are some of the gifts that you would want to share that you feel like, in light of the other ones, are the most powerful for this?
Well, I think that visionary thinking. So if you are in an organization and you have a strategic planning team, and if it's like with Karen in a finance department where they're past oriented, that's going to be really tough. Like you really need someone in leadership who has that introverted intuition, visionary thinking, but then there's going to be tension, right? Because that future vision is not tangible enough for the sensates to feel comfortable. And so there has to be more time spent in trust building, using analogies to past experience, finding what you can draw on that has been learned and how it's relevant to the future. It just takes a lot of work.
Well, what's interesting, though, is I'm also a business consultant as well. Like at Worsley Effectiveness Consultant. So I do a lot of strategy work. And we've always talked about envisioning. One really powerful way is scenario planning. And I could see the value of bringing someone else and asking and actually say, are you this type? Because this would really help people, because you would bring up ideas that people wouldn't have thought of. But then you start to prepare yourself for such a thing. And I think that's it's really interesting about valuing it for this type of thing, because then you're looking at contingencies and some other things for things that could happen. And then you're so much better off instead of it's like kind of making whatever you can more, using your gift to help widen the lens of different experiences or avenues that could happen, so that I can be better prepared, right? And kind of deal with the knowns, because that's kind of known because of what I value about the gift that you're bringing.
Yeah. So I have overdeveloped, for certain life experience reasons, my third function. So what is typically an adolescent in the back seat for me is really at the level of a co-pilot, and that's analytical thinking. So for me, I can combine this vision, past, present, future integrated way of seeing, along with sort of if this then contingency thinking and bring that together. And that's a little bit unique to me because of my life experience causing me to bring the teenager and develop it so it could be a co-pilot. And if you're a thinking type, there just can be impatience. We'll go into the challenges, but INTJs can definitely be impatient with those who cannot follow where they're trying to lead. But let me go finish with the gifts, which include pattern recognition. And this function is different from, say, a sensory pattern recognition, is that it's also the hidden patterns between maybe what seems to be unrelated ideas.
Which is similar to what I can do. So that's one of the gifts, and I'm able to do is see the pattern recognition. So this is the whole point of it.
Yes. And you do the same thing while it's right in the moment while it's happening. And I'm more like, I'm going to be noodling on it. And then the way it happens is it just pops into my head. Sometimes when I'm describing it, it's almost like I'm hearing it for the first time too, out of my own mouth. And I get this all the time as a therapist because my clients will be like, oh, wait, can you say that again? And then they want to write notes. And I'm like, I don't even know what I just said. Like whatever it was, it came up. I just was like serving it up. It's not like the conscious part of me did it. This is the thing. It's not like the conscious part of me is going, so-and-so is saying that. It's not. It's just I'm just kind of there and then something burst in. It's like, oh, it's this. And I'll describe it. I have no idea how to tell you where that came from. It's what I look for is, does it resonate with the person? And it typically 90% of the time it does resonate.
That's cool. That's cool. So what about also?
And then abstract thinking is another. Abstract thinking, abstract understanding. So conceptual. Something I notice with the sensory types is they're more concrete, more literal, and intuitives are more conceptual. And then there's depth of insight. It's almost, my types were often the priests. I think I've been telling people the reasons there's so few of us is our people were burned at the stake. We were crucified as heretics, because people were freaked out by what we could do. And it's like, burn them. So there ain't many of us left.
But let's talk through those. Because that's the whole point of the challenges. Because you said earlier, it's the difficulty of communicating some of these intuitions, right? And people understanding it. So tell us a little bit more about
communicating in a way that doesn't freak people out, or communicating in a way that they are just not dismissive. And I've worked with engineers who were INTJ types, and they were just so frustrated because they're trying to convey, they could see the problems that were going to unfold and they're trying to explain it, but what are they going to point to that's concrete? It's about what is going to happen, and they would be dismissed. They would be poo-pooed. Yeah. So there's difficulty communicating, especially stuff that happens unconsciously. So these types feel often either misunderstood or dismissed. There tends to be, sometimes you can just feel, I hear this, overwhelmed yourself by the complexity. And one of the traits you'll see with this type is stammering. They're trying to get the thought out and it never sounds adequate to the complexity inside, and they'll second guess themselves and stammer and then back up to try to grab the bigger picture and maybe start again. And that doesn't feel right, or they can't find the word. So there's a pause. And then people just think they'll get interrupted because they're it's so complex. And how do I bring this out in a way that people understand? And people just don't have the patience. So there's stammering, there's pausing. There's a tendency to give up and just sit back. And TJs do this a lot. Just let's let these fools do what they're going to do.
And well, you and I talked about this too, because you and I were talking a little bit about how my type, who's like an extrovert and want to not give you the time, and
extroverted intuitive.
Extroversion intuitive, to be able to deal with that, to have that space, right? And to encourage you and be an ally for you to say, no, Christina, take your time. I know what you're going to say is going to be impactful, and giving that encouragement if I interrupt at all, not to say what you're going to say or say, okay, or cut it off. But I think this is the interesting part for me, because I feel like that's part of the frustration. I could see you that happening so much that almost sometimes you don't want to even say anything, right? Which is the
Yeah.
shame part of it. That not a shame, but it's the sadness in us that we didn't get to hear it because we don't value it we don't value it, and I think this is the whole point of us becoming more conscious of this and being able to be an ally of yours and letting it come out and slowing down. And if you recognize this type in a person, is to understand where this is coming from.
Okay, you don't mean as sadness within yourself. You mean sadness or disappointment in others is what you meant when you said sadness. And as I'm not sure I understood what you meant by that.
Yeah, I meant sadness that our world brings about this not valuing the trade and shuts you down. It's probably because of my own value, importance of people being who they are, the authenticity and valuing people's authenticity is really important for me to value their being and what the gifts that they bring. That's my part of my value system. And I think that's what I meant by that sadness and I think we can start to change it with this podcast and people who are listening to this is to learn more. So, okay.
Yeah, because Karen is an introverted feeling type. And again, we're going to go into this in future episodes, but that is grounded in an internal value decision making. But remember, there's other decision-making types, like you might be an extroverted thinking type or an introverted thinking type who doesn't have that value, and they're just impatient and they just cut you off and they couldn't care less. So there's sadness and frustration for our personality types because of this getting cut off frequently. And then the way it feels is that people just don't have the interest or the curiosity to allow you to share your knowledge or gifts and to be seen. So again, like that iceberg, it's like, I just want to know what's up. Give me the quick. What's the fast food? I don't have the time to want to go into these depths. And so it can be, for the dominant introverted intuitives, thank goodness we're introverts, because it is a much more lonely existence because you just get tired. We feel the world around us as very superficial because we notice that people cannot go to the depths where we live. And they demand that we meet them where they're at all the time, which we can, and we learn how to do, but it is psychologically draining. People who have to do that in their careers are exhausted by the time they come home. And this is where I talk about the introversion extrovert. If I have to extrovert this all the time, I'm draining my battery. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, because I remember the thing that I love was the battery, where your battery is charged, but when you go more than, I forgot, like 10 or something, the battery is really low. And mine's the opposite, right? When I get into a lot of people, I get all that energy. I'm at full space where I have to talk to one person. My battery gets a little more drained. And
that's just the social battery, Karen. But what I'm even talking about is the process of, we have to take our inner vision, right, and make it explicit. We have to make it externalized. That is an extroverting process. So that takes our energy. And then if we're met with impatience or people are making assumptions and jumping to conclusions, I have to keep bringing out the clarity over and over again. Now you've drained my battery 4 times as much because of the continually demanding of extroverting that real huge complexity that's inside. And then we just go, y'all are a pain in the ass. It's like I'm happy off by myself. And so we will tend to shut down, keep our thoughts to ourselves. INTJs will say they can evaluate someone in 5 minutes and tell whether or not they're worth spending the effort trying to get them to understand. Like they'll move on right away. My types, INFJs, we're very, very slow to make that kind of judgment about other people, but we will get to that point in a couple years. 10 years. Yeah, we have a long time span when it comes to that, but we eventually will get to that sadness of it. No matter how hard I try, it's just not worth it anyway. It's just too much. It's too hard. So we become more and more insulated in ourselves. And so, that's an unfortunate loss and a challenge of this personality type.
So what are some of the advice you can give to those people who are this type that you've learned from your own lessons on the application of this?
Well, for the introverted intuitives with thinking, I would recommend you do practice patience. You have to practice patience, but you have to communicate more what you need. You have to say, give me a moment without interruption so I can gather my thoughts. You're going to have to make that explicit as a need and recognize your tendency to just get impatient, judge the people as dumb.
Imbeciles.
It's very judgmental. The INTJs are because of the brilliance. It's brilliance. I'm sorry, introverted intuition is a high level of intelligence. And so the judgment is like everybody else is just dumb. You don't have patience. Again, INFJs, we tend not to go there. And so for INFJs, the hard thing is to ask for our needs. It's really, really hard to do, but it's something you need to do. You have to start learning. If you want to feel connection, you want to feel that engagement, you're going to have to ask for what you actually need, which is, hey, I just need a moment to gather my thoughts. It's important to me that you understand and share that need, which is really, really, really hard for INFJs to do. So you see a lot of depression, existential aloneness, and giving up on people.
Yeah, and I also
we love a lot. Another gift, INFJs, we are loyal and we will love you like no one else can love you because we see you beyond your mask. So if we love you, we're loving the authentic you, and you will never feel a love like that, because most people are at the surface. But if you betray us, you're out of here. You're done.
Well, I think for me, it's also interesting about that when you say that, because I think it's making me more aware of different things, because just generically, I don't think we share our needs enough. We're assuming that other person I'm engaging with can read our mind, and I'm always testing them to read my mind. I get pissed off because my husband can't read my mind, or you can't read, you should have got this out of me. And I think that's the whole point of all of us understanding our own needs and sharing it. And we're not used to doing that because we don't want to slow it down, or there's other things going on. And I think we just have to learn to make requests, because a person can always say, go ahead.
There's a basic lack of understanding on how critical the phenomenon of neurodiversity is a thing. Because when we think we're all the same, and let me give you a quick example. I know we're going to go long in this one, but I did an experiment in graduate school on this, and the class was on diversity. And it was the most diverse class I'd ever had. The only thing we did not have was white males in the class. We had Hispanic, African-American, African international students. So we had foreign students. We had Asian. And we did this exercise where I demonstrated that you could have surface level diversity. So we made what looked like 3 diverse groups. But what they didn't know was their cognitive processing. 2 groups were homogenous, and only 1 group was cognitively diverse. And then we gave them a really difficult problem to solve. And it was predictive. That one was an introverted sensate, extroverted thinking group. They're going to be done in 5 minutes. It's going to be objective criteria. It's going to be boom, boom, boom. They're going to be done about 10 minutes. That's what and it took them 10 minutes. Then we had an intuitive feeling, a little bit mixed group. Okay, they're going to take longer. They're going to avoid doing it because they're going to feel bad and guilty. But, eventually they'll come up with something. I said, the last group is either going to completely break down or they're going to come up with the most creative solution. And they did. And they asked for they needed 40 extra minutes because they said it was so hard to communicate. They had to go so slowly. They had to keep checking for understanding. And the other 2 groups that on the surface looked diverse from a ethnic, cultural, and gender perspective, but their problem-solving process was predictable because it was homogenous. So neurodiversity is a very critical piece that we have not understood, we have not focused on, and there are problems in relationships, there's problems in schools, there's problems in the work environment, because we don't talk about it, we don't understand it at the depth that needs to be understood. And you're hearing my introverted intuition, the depth that needs to be understood.
So let me ask you something, because I think we talked a little bit about this, about when do you tend to how do you recognize when to trust your intuition?
So I find that INTJ types come out trusting their intuition much better than the INFJ types.
Okay.
And I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's because our decision making for the INFJs it's influenced by the effects of others. And so that
with
influence of other people causes us to doubt. Whereas the INTJs, like they're so solid in their intuition. I really admire it. They, like I said, they're more dismissive of other people. They're like, you can't follow me, and then get out of the way. So they just
I know a
follow
leader
it.
who has that type, exactly. But yeah.
Yeah. So it really, this is a question that's more to the INFJ, that 1.5% who probably isn't even listening. But you have to actually, I think, refocus and learn to feel it in your body. I can only tell you that's what my therapist helped me to do.
Yeah.
Is to learn how to tune into my body. That's where you feel it. And then you have to pay attention to when it happens and you're correct, and start validating for yourself, because you're not going to get validated very much externally. So it's a process to learn to trust it.
So because we're running out of time, so how would you want to conclude, or what some advice would you like to share or provide a summary?
Well, I think it's cool for everyone to try to think about where you might have experienced this function, introverted intuition. Remember, everyone at some point in your life has had the experience of some aha just popping into your head. You don't know where it came from. You just had that sense that your best friend was going to call, and then they do. That's introverted. Like, it's really hard to surprise me, because like boyfriends I would date, it's like I would always know. I'd be like, oh, they're going to bring flowers home today. Well, I don't know why I knew, but they did. Flowers. I was like, okay.
Even though they don't always bring it, but you knew the time that they would bring it, right?
I got into an argument with someone in a long distance relationship, like 3,000 miles away. And it was this really bad argument. And then at 1 a.m, I woke up and went, oh, he's flying out here. And then at 4 a.m, a knock at my door.
Oh, that's so wild.
I wasn't even surprised. I was like, So what I'd say is just what we keep repeating is we encourage you to do more learning and educating yourself on this. This is just a taste. We always put the link to Personality Hacker, because they also have a blog and you can read a lot of different things just on their website. There's the book Personality Type, an Owner's Manual by Lenore Thompson. It goes into functions in their introverted, extroverted attitude, so it's really good. And there's another book, if you're really nerdy or if you're in my field, I would recommend Jung's Model of Typology by Daryl Sharp, and I'll put that in the show notes.
So let's just say thank you, Christina. I want to just thank you personally for, being very open about this, because it is a little bit hard for you, I would assume, to share some of this. I really appreciate you sharing your insight with our group here. And you know what? I want to thank you guys again for listening in, because I think the more we can learn for ourselves and then share it with other people and reflect on some of these as we go through the ones that all these different ones that we've already gone through and the ones we're going to be going through, because you'll start to see and think of different people. I know I'm starting to think about different people at work and what they're like, and be more appreciative of it in a different way and showing up differently. So again, we can be allies to them, but also we can ask and understand that it's okay to make a request. Like Christina was doing, making a request, but just give me a little bit more time, right? And I think that's how we actually grow together as a community together.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen.
Okay.
It's beautiful.
Okay.
Right,
until next time, guys.
Yeah. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.